Hello, and welcome to Exhibit A. This is our firm podcast where we invite guests from the legal community and other disciplines so that we can hopefully bring our listeners and viewers some useful information. Today, I'm very excited to introduce my guest, Daryl Topalian. Welcome, Daryl.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And Daryl is an assistant principal at our local school district here. He has 25 years of experience in education. And in addition, Daryl is an adjunct professor at the University of La Verne, where he teaches graduate students. And Daryl has conducted and facilitated thousands of IEPs, that is, individualized educational plans. And with that comes experience with dealing with thousands of parents,
Right.
Specifically divorced and divorcing parents. Is that right?
That's correct.
So the topic today is special needs children, special education needs, and divorce.
Right.
And Daryl, with your experience, you've dealt with a lot of children and specifically with the parents going through divorce, correct?
That's correct.
So today we're going to talk about four different things. We're going to identify what the problematic behavior is based on your experience. We want to talk about what solutions educators like yourself can provide. Then I'm going to talk to our viewers and listeners about some of the things that your family law attorney can do for you. And finally, we want to talk about, from your perspective, what can parents going through this dynamic, what can they do differently? Right. The end goal is to make sure that these special needs children get the educational resources that they need and that the conflict is not getting in the way.
Right.
So with that, let's start off with identifying the problematic behavior. Based on your 25 years experience, what is it that you're seeing, Daryl, that's happening when it comes to the special needs children, the education, and also the conflict with the parents?
Yeah, well, first off, anytime there's a divorce in a family, whether the child is in general education or is receiving services because their child's been identified for special needs, children just need to be loved and adored and valued and cherished. And then when you put the identification that your child has a need that needs to be addressed that involves special education services, that sometimes can be an added stressor for a family, period, even for an intact family. And so now when you have a family who's in discourse, the child's going to feel that, whether the child has a special need that has been identified or not. And so some of the problematic behaviors that we see is that definitely the child is obviously going to change their behaviors at school because that's a place where they're going to be 8 hours out of the day. Right. So the child might find themselves to isolate themselves more, to definitely not be as connected into a class as they normally are. Their participation may decrease, and so they're just going to not answer the questions like they normally are used to doing in their class, because usually in a special needs classroom, those numbers are smaller, so it becomes a little bit easier to be identified. And now when you don't have that place to hide in a classroom of maybe 30 kids, boy, it's hard, especially when you're in a place where your performance matters. It's what school's for. They're going to look at how you're doing. And so the children will then might act out as well. So now that's maybe a classroom disruption. And then it becomes maybe a change of friends. And then it becomes difficult for them, depending on what their identity, how they're identified in special needs. It might be auditory processing. It could be severe, mild developmentally delayed student. It could be the autism, Asperger's. It could be a wide variety of issues.
So we're kind of talking about how the impact on the child here, and so you're saying it's not only educational, it could be behavioral.
Oh, absolutely.
And some of the other things that you've mentioned. And, based on your experience, what do you see happening with the parents? Are there issues, for example, with decision making or anything like that?
Yeah, because they both come with their own agendas, and they both come with they think what they believe to be true and to be right. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's coming to an agreement and to more of like a resolution. What can we agree to disagree on? But really, what's our focus? And our focus is what's in the best interest of our child. Oftentimes when the family becomes separated or there's a divorce going on, the issues come up against the other spouse, and then that's a game changer.
One of the patterns that we see in family law is where one parent is adamant that their child has, something that needs to be addressed, whether it be ADHD or otherwise or on the spectrum. Right. And the other parent is adamant that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the child. The child doesn't need the recommended therapy or medication. And so when you have that kind of when you have that dynamic happening, those are the types of people that we see needing our services, because somewhere in the middle is the truth, and the judge has to figure out what's in the best interest of the child.
Right. And so what you look at is from an educational standpoint, from the teachers to the counselors to an instructional aide that would be in the classroom to the standardized assessments that are done, that we're looking at is multiple measures. How the child does on assessments, how the child's doing with their homework and their tests and their quizzes, how's the child functioning in school. So we look at that. And that doesn't lie. That's data. And that's what you can present to a parent that says, no, my child doesn't have any learning disability, or my child doesn't need to be assessed. Or it may work in the favor of the other parent that says, yes, there's an issue there. Our job as educators is to help the parents and put that information in front of them and say, this would be in the best interest of your child. And hopefully that they'll see that and put whatever agenda that they have aside, looking at what's in front of them, looking at, yes, my child does struggle in reading. My child does struggle in comprehending what they're reading. My child does struggle with memory.
When we're talking about identifying the problematic behavior, how is it that educators are trained? For example, if there is an ongoing IEP in the process, how is it that you communicate and educators communicate with parents that are divorced as far as obtaining consent forms and otherwise?
Right.
How is it that your the teachers that you manage are dealing with that type of dynamic?
Right. One thing parents need to understand is anything that we have at the school that the parents write down from the day one of registration, that's what we go by. If there's a change in that, then we need to know that change. If not, we go by what's on paper.
Okay.
And so what we'll do is we'll send something home. Now, more than likely, we'll get a phone call from a parent, by the way, mom and dad, or from mom or dad, we've separated. My new address is this. Can you please also include me on phone calls, emails, mailings that go home? Can I do that? At schools, absolutely, we will do that.
Okay, and then let's move forward then. Let's assume then, hypothetically, that there is a high conflict situation. What, part of your experience that I didn't mention is that part of your work is mediating issues between parents and their own child, and mediating issues between parents and teachers.
Right.
So what are some specific solutions or methods that you've had to implement, or that you've taught your teachers to implement when there is a special needs child and there are parents in conflict that are not working together to help this child move forward?
Yeah. Well, before that would even take place, there's every child who's in special needs have what they call an IEP, Individualized Educational Plan. And that plan we need to follow. And that plan consists of goals, academic goals that are based on, those goals are based on an assessment that's done to see where the kid's having some struggles. And here are the things that we're going to do to help this child. And so that we're going to focus on that. And then that when we meet with the parent, those are the things that we're going to talk about. Like, here's how the child's meeting the goal. Here's how the child's not meeting the goal. And that usually does most of the time take as the focus off whatever the parent's issue is. But now, how can we really help this child meet these goals? Because then it brings them right back to the main thing, like I said in the beginning. The main thing is what's in the best interest of that child to make sure that they're successful while they're at school.
That's interesting that you say that, Daryl, because that kind of crosses over with a technique that lawyers and mediators use, and that is when you're negotiating something, you try to get people away from their positions.
Right.
And get them to think about their interests. So if someone's position is there's nothing wrong, the child is fine, the child doesn't need medication, and you divert that parent's attention to the best interest of the child, the data shows that the child is experiencing X. The research shows that, these three things would help the child. So we kind of move away from the ego-based position and
Right.
get people back to what's best for the child. At the end of the day, that's what every parent wants.
Right. And usually for a family that has a child who is receiving special education services, they have to sign off on that. I think if you go back, the trouble might be is before a child receives special education services, it's what's going to bring us to that point to sign off to make sure the child gets assessed. And that's where we go back to the MTSS model of the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and then we look at what we call an SST team, which is a Student Study Success Team, which is the teachers, an administrator, a counselor, and the parents, and we look at, okay, what does the data show? What have we done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? And now what are our next steps and what are we going to do? And what can we all agree to?
Very good.
So,
Well, there are a couple of things, on point, on the question of what can your family law attorney do for you. So when we have a situation where there's a special needs child or other educational needs, what is it that the family court can help you with? First of all, for parents that are divorced or divorcing, they need to establish or modify legal custody orders. So legal custody is the decision making for the health, education, and welfare of a child. And there are some instances where, for example, if there's one parent stonewalling, which I've seen the situation in my practice where one parent is not cooperative with the IEP, doesn't show up to meetings, doesn't sign off on required forms, doesn't provide information, or somehow is obstructing the process. If, from the family law aspect, if a parent can document and provide evidence of that, then the court can order what we call tie-breaking authority, and that is, mother and father. Father must ask mother if it's okay if we proceed in this direction. If there's not an adequate or timely response, or there's a continuous disagreement, one parent may have tie-breaking authority and can make the decision and move forward. And if the court gives a parent that ability, it's not considered a violation of their legal custody orders. So tie-breaking authority is one of the things that you can request in family court. Another thing is, perhaps in order for conjoint therapy with the parents and the child. Family court has the jurisdiction to do that, and it may be helpful to, again, if it's conjoint therapy with the child, to focus on the child's interests. There are some situations where, the court goes to the farthest extreme, and that is giving sole legal custody to only one of the parents. And that means that parent is solely able to make all decisions regarding health, education, welfare of the child. The other parent is left out of the decision making. The other parent, by law, can still, review records and have information about the child. The ability to join in on the decision is taken away. So those are some of the things that the family law attorney can do. Okay, so Daryl, is there anything else that you want to share as far as what educators can do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that from an educational standpoint that school counselors get involved because their role is so huge on a school campus, whether it's primary or secondary being the middle school and the high school because they're such critical levels. But really specifically too at the elementary site, because if a family is going through a divorce or a separation, the children are going to feel it. And there's no doubt, even at all the levels, but especially that elementary site. But getting your elementary school counselor involved to have those talks with the child, that place the child can go to feel safe, to have some conversations. And if a child's having a tough day in the classroom, a place to go. Now, there also is that if that child is in special education, there might be some other services from the regional center or from the outside that the child would be receiving at the school site. But also, it doesn't hurt for the school counselor at the school to work with those kids. They're highly trained. They're not therapists, but they're able to give the kids some strategies and some tools to be successful throughout the day. When they're feeling upset, when something triggers their mind that reminds them about the tension between mom and dad, that the counselor is able to give them some tools and strategies to help them through the day. Or just to be that safe place on campus. Kids need that. Because especially when we put them in an environment 8 hours a day where they feel like they have to perform, it's tough.
Well, that's interesting because that ties into your work at University of La Verne.
Right.
You're working with graduate students to be counselors in
the public school setting. Yeah.
So what is it that what is it that you're teaching them that kind of goes into how they can help parents and children in this scenario?
Yeah, the course I teach at the University of La Verne, I teach graduate students, but I teach graduate students about school counseling programs and legal mandates. Basically, in a nutshell, that's school law and ethics and how that applies to school counselors. So you have theory, that I talk about theory and ed code and what all that looks like, and then at the end of the day, I just bring, this is what it looks like on the day-to-day. Because we can all talk about theory and law, but here's what it looks like. Here's some case scenarios. How are we going to tackle this? And I call them SITNAs, situations that need attention. And I just bring my graduate students together, and and I pull from them because I want them to feel confident of what they know.
Tell me, can you bring that down and give me some examples of what types of day-to-day situations are you discussing with them?
Well, let's look at exactly what we're talking about now. You have a disgruntled parent that's coming in. They're going through divorce. They want a copy of the child's cume folder, and they're upset. They're at the front desk. The office staff is in the front. The first thing you always tell our office staff is go get your administration or get your school counselors to help. Usually, school counselors have that skill to diffuse a situation and pull them back at the office and talk to them about what they really need, what they're going to be doing with that cume folder, how can we help? And that's important. And then we want to look to see if they have the rights to look at that cume folder, because it's important, at least you validate them as a parent to make sure that is the parent of that child, and it's not someone coming in with a different agenda who's related to one of the parents. That's the crazy stuff that goes on in schools today.
Well, that's interesting because we're representing the parent, and we're saying go to the school and get the information, or we're representing the parent who calls us and says, the other side is not allowing me to get the information. So that's interesting to know from our perspective how that's handled and how the counselors are actually trained in how to diffuse the situation. So that's pretty that's pretty important information from our standpoint. So I wanted to talk to you about, based on your 25 years experience, what can parents do differently?
Every situation is so different. And I think that, my situation is going to be different from somebody else's situation. And there's no right or wrong answer. But I think the main thing to answer that question, and it's so important to me, something I've learned, has been to keep my kids as the focus point. And sometimes we lose track of that. We're human beings. We're going to have fault. And when a parent comes in and gets derailed for whatever reason, they're sad, they're upset, they're hurt. Hurting people hurt people. And oftentimes they hurt the ones that are closest to them, and they don't realize sometimes what they're doing is hurting their kids. And if we can bring them back to remember the main thing of why we're here is we're here for the best interest of their kid. And how do we address that? And how do we work together? And I might not have the other parent in the room. Usually it's mom, sometimes it's dad, but usually it's mom. And how can I help them understand where we need to go? And as well as with the dad, how can I understand them where we need to go? And that's keeping the focal point on the child.
Perfect. Well, in all these years, I know this is a very serious topic, but there have to be some success stories. So tell me about a situation or a case or a family where you felt like it started kind of rocky, but things ended up okay, or things ended up, in a better place for the child. You must have some success stories.
Yeah, there's a lot of success stories, but there's a lot of ones that still break my heart because I feel like, what could we have done better as a school system, and where maybe the school system had failed the child? And I think sometimes those are the ones I go like, I haven't learned that yet, but I feel like now I've learned it now, but I wish I knew that then. So some of the success stories that really that make me excited about where I see kids are at. One particular situation I saw the group of boys going through the school system, and three of the boys were all receiving special education services from elementary school all the way through high school. Dad was incarcerated, but the mom, she played such a proactive role, but the cool thing about it was she never spoke ill of the father. The cool thing about it is that she always made sure the father knew and asked for copies so she could make sure that the father got him. And then also gave us the name of the father if by chance he was out for parole, that he could come to the school site visitation.
Wow, great.
So obviously there was a lot of anger for her. I remember in the very beginning stages when the children were in elementary school at the district that I was at for a long time. But watching her as a parent change her thought process and realizing this anger is getting me nowhere. It just makes it more frustrating, and the pain is more hurtful for her as a mom. But then that goes to the kids, and she's letting that go, but then realizing nothing's going to change where the child's father is, but what can I do to at least let him know that the kids are doing okay, which is going to be helpful to the kids. And that's her taking her own personal agenda aside and then watching her boys flourish. The boys are now in college. Well, two of the boys are in college. The third one is now at the local high school where I used to work, at the district where I used to work, and doing and flourishing and doing well. And that's only because I really believe in, and even talking to the boys, mom stayed firm. Mom stood her ground, but also cut some things off, pruned a little bit. This is a hurtful branch. I don't need that hurtful branch because it's not allowing me to produce fruit in the other areas that I should be producing for my boys. And that's not speaking ill of the father. That's moving forward in the right direction.
Well, thank you. I love that story. I think that's great. I think
Right.
that's kind of what we need to hear because this is, like I said, it's a serious topic and
Yeah.
we want to hear the success stories. And we want to provide people information to tell them what you can do differently, what you can, having us understand what's happening on your end with the educators and the counselors, I think helps people understand what you guys are going through, the challenges that you have, what you're observing, and likewise what the parents can do differently. So,
Right.
Daryl, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much. I want to conclude by thanking my guest, Daryl Topalian, and I hope that we've provided you with some resources and some information. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.